Hello everyone and welcome back to Video Editing 1 with Professor Harris. Today we're going through Lesson 12 in the MC110 book, Nesting Effects and Playback Performance. So far in this course you've applied only one effect to clips. This lesson revisits nesting, applying multiple effects to one or more clips. After a brief review, you'll explore additional tips and techniques that make nesting an essential effect building tool. This lesson also covers ways to solve playback issues without having to upgrade your hardware, your system. Today we're going to be working in the Tennessee parkour, and let's look at some of the goals for this lesson. Everything disappears. Our goals for this lesson are to nest effects, use simple and expanded nesting views, optimize video playback performance, and render an effect. Let's get into it. Nesting effects. During the MC110 course, you use nesting techniques to add multiple effects to segments in the film Jacuzzi. During the next exercise, you'll add effects to the 3D pip layers that we created in the TN parkour montage. Remember this? I just played this at the beginning, here I gotta change it. There, now we can see it. We can see all those we can see all those different 3D pips I add to that. In both cases, the goal is the same. Apply multiple effects to one segment in the timeline, but the approach changes slightly when we're adding effects to multiple layer composites. So this is a multi-layer composite here for this shot, but we're used to just adding it to a standard V1. This section reviews nesting on a single video track and then adds tips for nesting effects within a multi-layer effect. So let's get into some of that review. So adding multiple effects to a V1 segment. So we're going to come over here and we're going to use this clip on our V1 as a reference. So let's use a scenario to review the basic nesting workflow. What if you're working with HD footage in an HD project and you need to add or adjust a shot's framing and add a 1.66 mask? You did this in the MC101 course. So to refresh, we're going to add multiple effects to our segment by adding the first effect. So we're going to add that resize effect here, the resize effect. And then we're going to hold the Alt or Option key on our keyboard and drag the second effect. We're going to drag a mask now. And that Alt or Option key makes it so that we can add multiple effects to the same segment. So now we've held Alt or Option, we've added that second effect. Now we have a resize effect and a mask effect on the same segment in the timeline. Do you remember what this procedure is called? If you do, gold star to you. The answer is auto nesting, right? Auto nesting is the function that occurs when we add multiple effects onto the same segment. It's called auto nesting. Just a reminder, when you auto nest an effect, it appears above existing effects in the effect editor. So if I come to this segment in my timeline and I hit my effect editor, we're going to see that my mask appears on top of my resize effect. So it's always working from the top down. Remember, I talked about God looking down upon us. Same thing with this. When we're looking down, that's how we're seeing our project, layer for layer. Cool. What else? In our scenario, an auto-nested 1.66 mask effect in the film category appears above our resize effect, like I just showed you. If you auto-nest another effect, it will appear above our 1.66 mask. So if I added another effect, it would appear above this mask. Again, top-down order. Okay, so as you may recall, the order you apply effects can matter. For example, what if we apply the 1.66 mask effect first and then the auto resize effect? Well, the resize effect would affect our mask if we had put the resize effect on after we put the mask. So that's because lower effects get included in the higher effects adjustment to the material. So if this creates an undesirable result, if this creates an undesirable result, you can change the effect order later. And we can change that effect order up here in our right here in our effect editor. So let's say, for instance, let's do a quick drop down on this. Let's say I wanted to adjust this so I had my Beat Boys cover album, and then I had my resize effect here, and I made some adjustments to my resize effect. Now, if I switch the location of my resize effect and put it above my mask effect, that changes what we're looking at. So it's a bag of lollies, as they say in Adventure Time, but just make sure you're getting the correct order because order matters when we're working with these things. If we wanted to reorder our effects in our nest, additionally, we could make sure we park our position indicator over the segment with the nested effects, and then activate the effects workspace and or the effects mode like I have here. And then in our effect editor, like I just showed you, we can drag them up and down. Adding and troubleshooting nested effects on a single segment quickly becomes straightforward once you understand how it's ordered essentially here in our effect editor. Auto-nest the effects and make adjustments if you need to. And then if necessary, change the effect order. Again, super easy. Just keep repeating myself. Adding effects now to a multi-layer composite. Let's get into that. So we're going to come over here to where we actually have a multi-layer composite. I'm going to clear my marks because I have an in and out in the timeline, and I don't need that selected. Okay, so what if you need to adjust a shot's framing in a split screen, for example? Let's zoom in to the shots on the lower left box. So if I wanted to instead zoom in on this box, but I also wanted to have all this happening at the same time, we can do that. If you auto-nest a resize effect on top of our 3D pip and make adjustments, here's what's going to happen. Okay, but why don't I just show you what's going to happen? So if I add a resize effect, where's my resize? Resize effect on top of my topmost of my split screen that I have already nicely developed here, again, holding Option or Alt, I can add that effect. Now I have that resize effect, and when I open the effect editor, I can make adjustments in my resize effect, and plop. Now, a very fascinating thing has happened here. It has shrunk everything. Everything's resized. This shot, this shot, this shot, and it all maintains the same, essentially the same image. This is because adjustments affect everything below the new effect. So, as you can see on my screen, the resize with when we resized with our auto nest feature on the topmost track, which is our V4 in this instance, this effect changed all the effects below. It applied that change to all the effects below as well. This affects the layers 3D pips plus the V2 and V1 and V3's panels. So again, it's essentially inheriting all the changes at once. If you drag the resize effect or another effect below the 3D pip in the following, if we drag it below one of these, so let's say I try to put a resize, let me undo this action. I'm going to remove that effect. Okay, so now I remove that resize effect. Let me try and drag it to a lower track and not the topmost, and then make an adjustment here. Let me go to my effects editor. Let me disable this track so I can get to my resize effect, and then I start adjusting things. It's one, not going to look the way that we want it to, and two, we were supposed to get an error message. In the book, it says if you drag a resize effect or another effect below the 3D pip, a message appears, and I'm going to show that message on screen now. And here we go. These effects cannot or can't be reordered because they don't have the same number of input tracks. So, I think I know what I messed up here. So let me try and undo what I just did here. If I undo this, undo my add, let's try instead. We'll add that resize effect. I'll put it on top. And then if I go into my effect editor here and I try and reorder it here to the bottom, now the message comes up. Yippee! All right, so to understand what this message means and how to avoid it altogether, you use nesting views to add effects to multi-layer composites. You explored these in the MC110 course as well. As you may recall, we have the nesting views that let us display and access nested effects in the timeline. Let's review with a quick quiz. There's a quick quiz, and I'm going to pull that up on screen now. Okay, it's big brain time. Activate your brain cells. We're going to try and remember the difference between simple nesting view and expanded nesting view. All right, so match these up. I'll give you a second. Okay, how'd you do? Probably horribly. That's a joke. So simple nesting view obviously goes to A. That's right. Isolates nested effects so you can only see the contents below the topmost effect. Easy peasy. An expanded nesting view goes to B. Lets you access nested effects and make adjustments while viewing all effects at once. Easy peasy. How did you do? How did you do on this small quiz? If you're able to match the nesting view with its description, that's great. If not, no worries. We're going to continue to review and explore how they work with the multi-layer composites. All right, so simple nesting view. This view isolates nested effects when you step into a nested effect build in the timeline. So we're going to see the timeline change as well, so you'll only see the contents below the upper effect. So let's get into that simple nested view. That looks like this. Let me hover over, and I'm going to hit my step in button here. And now we're looking at that 3D pip that was underneath that resize effect. It does say we're looking at the V1, and this is where it gets a little bit weird. This says it's the R07-03 slow-mo railing ramp. If I step back out, we can see that that is still this shot. So we are stepping into this effect, although it says V1 when we hit the step in. Essentially, we're able now to work with that 3D pip in isolation. I could hit my resize effect, and we could adjust those settings here. Again, you can adjust those external to this if you wanted to in your effect editor, but if you wanted to try and like straighten things out for yourself, this is simple nested view. This is how you would organize and go through that. Awesome. Again, stepping into an effect on the V1, or if we were stepping in on our V4, let's try and step on a V1, and we'll step into this effect. If we step into our V1, it reveals the nested segment effects and hides the audio. If you've nested multiple effects, you can continue to click the step in until you reach the original effect or free segment. So if I step in again, we're going to see we've reached the original effect free segment. So now we're back down to the base layer. This is what the video looks like raw. I can step out to my resize effect and then step out again, and boom, we are back out to my mask that I also have on this effect. So again, I could edit this. There's my mask. If I hit step in, it's going to go into my resize effect. If I step in again, it's going to go down to my original video file. All right, I hope that all makes sense. And you can see those, as we step in, we can see the different adjustments changing up in our record monitor. Okay, any effect that you add, like a resize for example, gets added below our outer effects. So we already know how that works. Simple nested view becomes helpful when stepping into multi-layer effects. For example, what if you activated the V3 and then hit the step in button? So let's for our sake, we're working with 4 tracks. So we're going to activate our V4, and then we're going to hit that step in. So we'll hit our step in, and we see that 3D pip, and then what we have to do is hit step in again, and we get down here. Now this is where it gets weird. We have our original video file, right? But we also have a second track. We see a V1 track. Let me explain this real quick. So this time, the timeline displays 2 tracks, indicate you stepped into a blend or compositing effect like a 3D pip, like we just did. You'll work with the segment on the V2 and leave the filler on V1 empty. For example, you can add a color correction preset to the V2 and review the results in full screen view. Again, if you do this, the effect gets applied below the 3D pip or another blend effect. So it's essentially telling us that we're leaving the window open. When we step in all the way, we can apply another effect down here, and that's going to apply it to the bottom of our order. Keep that in mind. So that's a really neat feature. So if we need to step in, we could do that, right? Step into the bottom and then add an effect at the bottom rather than adding it to the top like we're typically always doing. Again, if you do this, the effect gets applied below the 3D pip or another blend effect. So this works for blend effects. Okay, what if you need to replace a shot in a split screen that includes keyframing and nested effects? So we already have, let me step all the way back out here real quick. We already have our shots here, but what if we needed to replace this center spinning shot, right? We added keyframes to this. It's doing all kinds of crazy stuff. Well, we're gonna figure out how to do that. You can use simple nesting view to do this without disrupting the split screen's layout, keyframing, or nested effects. And I'm gonna explain how to do that now. So to replace a shot in a multi-layer composite, we're gonna park the position indicator over the composite and activate the track containing the shot that we're going to replace. So which shot are we going to replace? It's actually this topmost shot. I believe it's the V4 shot. If I disable, well, that's not going to help me. I need to view this in isolation. How do I do that? Or I could just view the one beneath and then know that I'm essentially turning off that topmost. Okay, so we have verified that this is the topmost track. Our V4 is the topmost track. Now we're going to click the step in button until we reach the segment without any effects. So we'll go step in, and boom, we've reached our video segment that has no effects. Now we're going to click the mark clip button on our keyboard by hitting T. So we'll just hit T, easy peasy, lemon squeezy. And then we're going to load the replacement clip into our source monitor and set our in and out marks. So let's go back to our bins. We'll go back to our footage. Parking lot sounds interesting. Okay, we have in and out marks, so that's pretty easy. I'm gonna move this back a little bit. I think the shot's a little longer. Okay, so now we have that. So now we're going to patch the source V1 to the record V2 and then click the overwrite button or B on our keyboard. So we have our V1 patched to our V2. I just moved this if you didn't see that. All right, so I'm going to hit B, and we have put an overwrite. We have overwritten this shot. Now we can press the step out button until we reveal the entire sequence and include the audio tracks. So we're going to step out and boom. Now if we click our topmost segment, look, we've simply replaced the shot, and that keyframed animation that we made is still there. It still exists. The shot has simply been replaced. So now we have a lovely parking lot skylight that we're looking at. Let's play it all the way through to see its beauty. And it doesn't want to play today. That's sad. I was so excited for this one too. All right, I guess we'll have to keep moving. Okay, I hope all that made sense. I know that was rather confusing, a little bit confusing, hopefully not super confusing, but you can go into your effects in the nested view and change out your shots, and it's going to maintain, again, those settings. We have our border and our keyframes to animate that shot in the middle. Okay, with compositing effects, this is a note from Avid, by the way. With compositing effects, you should always leave the V1 track inside your nest empty. Editing the clip into this track will replace the background outside the nest. So it's going to replace the background outside of our nest. So if I come in here and I put a shot on my V1, just know that's going to mess everything up. So don't do that. Let's keep going. Simple nesting view works great when you want to display a split screen layer in a full screen or when you're replacing a shot in a composite. What if you need to add an effect to improve a shot's framing? Adjusting a resize effect in simple nesting view becomes a challenge because you can't see the result inside the layers box or panel. Am I even speaking English anymore? So what it's saying is when you're stepping in and you're adjusting resize effects, it's like impossible to see what you're doing because it doesn't show up in the layers box or panel. To eliminate the guesswork, we can use expanded nesting view for this. So let's move into expanded nesting view. Let's move into English. All right, this view lets you access your nested effects in the timeline and make adjustments while viewing all effects at once. Plus, you can monitor your audio at the same time. So simple nested view, big thing, audio disappears. If I step in once, that's going to go into simple nested view, my audio is gone. Expanded nested view, we're going to still see our audio. Avid's going to test you on that, and so am I to my students. All right, so to activate our expanded nested view, we're going to park the position indicator over the nested effect and activate its video track selector blue. So we've already got our thing, blop, it's activated, bing bong bing. Now we're going to expand the nest by doing one of the following. We can hold the Alt or Option on Mac key and then click the Step In button at the bottom of the screen or our timeline. So I can hold Option and click that. Or we can double click the segment in the timeline and that's going to do the same thing. So if I double click this, boom, it's going to do that. I can also hit the Option key and hit this. And we can keep clicking this until we see the extent of this shot expanded. Super easy peasy. So as you can see on my screen, the nested segments appear above the outermost effect. If you add an effect to a segment, you can repeat the steps to reveal the next nested level. So we can keep clicking this until we see everything. Once again, expanded nesting view reveals a 2-track setup for blend effects like the 3D pip to adjust a split screen image's framing, add the resize effect to a segment and not filler. Again, add that resize effect to the segment and not the filler. Okay, so here's our segment, not the filler. Don't touch the filler. Leave the filler alone. It's okay where it is. So as you can see on my screen again, the resize effect adjusts the framing of the image within the box only. So if I go into my effect editor here and I start playing around here, let's step out just a tad here. Hold Option, I'll step out. Let me double click in here to just get into my resize effect so I can adjust the settings on that. If I make adjustments with my resize effect and expanded nesting view, we can see those adjustments are reflected. And it's working. It's working. It's working. To quote Star Wars there. Sweet. All right, as shown in this lesson, nesting adds flexibility and creative potential to affect builds. That's why our nesting review includes several new details. So let's sum up. Let's sum all this up. So as you nest effects, keep the following in mind. Number one, to add an effect on top of an existing effect on V1, auto nest, in other words, hold the alter option as you add the next effect. So to review, make sure you're holding that modifier. If we have an effect that's already on a clip, we need to hold that modifier and then drag and drop it onto. Number two, to add an effect to a multi-layer composite, step into the blend effect, for example, a 3D pip or 3D warp, and then add the effect below the existing effect. Remember that. Number three, to rearrange filter effects, for example, a V1 segment with a color correction preset, a 1.66 mask, and a resize, drag the effects icon up or down in the effect editor. Remember, we can make those changes. We could come into this and we go, yes, I don't want this here. I want my 3D pip on top. Blop, and we get that message because we can't do that, but you know what I mean. Number four, although you can use either the nesting view to replace a shot in a multi-layer composite, use simple nesting view by using the step in and out buttons to work with less visible tracks. So it's going to make your life easier. And then number five, to view a composite while working with nested effects, for example, adjusting resize parameters to change a shot's framing, use expanded nesting view by double-clicking the 3D pip or alter option clicking that step in and step out buttons at the bottom here. So those are the 5 big takeaways from this. Don't forget them. Keep them in mind. They're complicated. They sound confusing, but if you're confused, just rewatch everything I just said. Hopefully it'll start making a little more sense to you. All right. You use these tips while adding effects to split screen in the TN parkour montage going forward. All right, to wrap up this section, let's revisit the error message that we got earlier that will appear if you auto nest a filter effect above a blend effect like a 3D pip and then attempt to move the new effect above it. So let's try and do that again. We're going to get the error again. Beautiful, beautiful error. I'm going to zoom up on it now. Perfect. Let me zoom back out. Okay. This happens because blend effects like the 3D pip contains 2 nested tracks, while the filter effect like a resize has 1. So that's why this occurs, because again, they don't have the same number of input tracks. So thanks, Avid, for telling us you're going to explain it and then going surface level with their explanation. But that is really it. It's just that they don't have the same number of tracks. All right, let's keep moving now. We're going to move on to improving effect playback. As you may recall, most effects in Media Composer are real-time effects. This means they have little green dots on them in our effect monitor. So we can see we have little green dots on these, little green dots on these effects, and a bunch others. Many effects have little green dots, which means they are real-time. They play back in real time as applied. This means, again, that you can play them back at full speed without rendering it. At some point, real-time effects may stop playing back smoothly. I want to shake the computer right now, but that is true, and I'll explain in a second. You may notice that the video stutters or freezes temporarily. Several factors can cause this, mainly 3. Number 1, you create a complex composite with more layers and effects than the system can process and play in real time. Very true, happens a lot. You build effects in a high-resolution, high-res project that the system struggles to process and play in real time. This is probably the most common. I work at a university. We have top-of-the-line, brand-new Mac computers. My students are going to listen to me rant about this. We have brand-new computers, and they'll shoot 4K footage, and we've got these 64-gigabyte RAM computers with the best specs, and when we're trying to edit in Avid, there's still stutter. Maybe not in these lessons with this footage, because it's a lower res. It's not really low res, it's still HD, but when we use that 4K footage, boy does it stutter. Boy does it stutter. You get red lines everywhere. And then number 3, you edit on a system that doesn't meet Avid's recommended system specifications. Now, I work on this computer. It's only got 16 gigs of RAM. but it does a pretty good job. I typically don't edit these videos because they're recorded in 4K on my screen's monitor here. I edit in Premiere Pro because I'm trying to get those out quickly to my students and to you on the internet, and just as fast as possible. But when I do edit in Avid, again, that 4K footage, that does stutter, and Avid specifications are pretty high, and they should be high because this video editing system does take a lot of power. But if you're just trying to edit in 1080p and lower, Avid works perfectly. It works perfectly smooth. You got to have really high specs if you want to work with that 4K and higher rasters and frame. Anyway. So for reference there. All right, every time you play a sequence, Media Composer monitors system performance in real time, and it can play back what went wrong when it does stutter. So the app displays colored bars in the timecode ruler and tracks once you stop playback. So if I look at this, this is what that looks like. This segment was played through, and we have these little red lines of stuttering. In the real world, the way this works is it'll just put a red line across the bottom, consistent, until it stops stuttering so much, and then it'll keep going. At least that's the way I've seen it. But it still puts that nice little red line at the bottom to tell you red bars in the TC1 track shows areas that overtax the system, causing stuttering or stuttered playback. So there are other color bars that we'll see as well, and these mean different things. Here's what the 3 color coded performance bars mean. Number 1, we have yellow bars. These show areas that stress the system, the CPU and GPU, but played back in real time. So it still stressed the system, but it didn't really compromise in the playback. Next, we have blue bars. This shows areas that stressed the hard drive containing the source media, but still play back in real time. So if your hard drive isn't fast enough, it's not getting that connection to Avid, your linked media isn't reading quick enough, whatever it may be, that's going to show there. And then we have red bars, which I just explained, but this shows areas that overtax the system during playback and cause skipped or dropped frames. Ideally, you've upgraded your system if it doesn't meet Avid's specifications, so you got to keep that up to date. That's going to help you run the program as smoothly as possible. Or you'd move media to a faster drive configuration to eliminate the blue bars. So if you had a better drive, a better flash drive, better hard drive, better whatever, better system, better Ethernet cable, whatever it may be, you're going to want to use that better thing. In reality, this may not be possible sometimes because you might not have fat money. A lot of people don't, so just keep that in mind. Plus, what if your project's format or complex effects build causes your yellow and red bars to appear? What do you do then? You'll need an alternate English. You'll need an alternative solution, right? So to regain real-time playback, if we're working with that high-res footage, we can try one or more of the following tips. Number 1, we can lower the project's format settings. So we can decrease some of the settings. Maybe we turn down the frame rate, we turn down the raster dimensions, whatever it may be, but we decrease it so that it plays back more smoothly. Number 2, we can reduce the sequence playback quality. What does that look like? Let me shrink this. I guess it's going to go into it in a second, but essentially that's down here. That's this little guy here. We can reduce the playback quality in the way that it's showing us in our record monitor. And number 3, we can render the effects. So if we have a bunch of effects, we have this multi-layered effect. It's not causing any stuttering right now, but if it was causing stuttering, we could render it out, and so that it's got that essentially quote-unquote memorized, and it knows how to play through this area. All right, so let's take a closer look at each. First, to change your project's format settings, we're going to go to File, and then in Settings here at the bottom, we're going to, or we could press Control-Shift equals if we wanted to pull it up a little faster, or Command-Shift equals if you're on Mac. And then in the Format tab, we're already in the Format tab, we're going to click the Preset menu and select a lower quality format. So we have our preset, and we can select a lower quality format. We could go, well, you know what I'm trying to do. This is already set pretty low to 720p at 23.976 frames per second. So we already have that. There's our raster dimensions. We could decrease our raster dimensions too if we wanted to. But the preset's probably going to be the better way, obviously. That's what Avid's recommending here. Does this seem familiar? Well, you explored the format settings during the Lesson 1 and in Lesson 8 when we were, again, playing with our presets. So if you'd rather not change your project's format, if you want to keep it in 4K, or that doesn't solve the playback issue, you can try the other two options. We can change the sequence video quality. So let's close this. Let's see what that looks like. During the MC101 course, you may have increased video quality to improve a title's appearance in the record monitor. Well, down here at our bottom guy, when we work with high resolution or high res footage for complex effects or complex effects builds, you may need to reduce the video quality. To do this, you'll select a specific option from the video quality menu at the bottom of the timeline. That is this little guy here. So to switch the specific video quality options, we can right-click the video quality menu, and we're going to see this window appear. And then we're going to select one of the following options. We have draft quality. I'm going to hover over that. Draft quality, which is the default setting, scales the frame by 50% in each direction, or a quarter frame, which means 1/4 of the data needs to be processed. This results in a slightly softer image in our record monitor. That's what we're actually seeing. Next we have, let me right click here, we can go to best performance. Best performance scales the image by 75% in each direction, so that's 1/16 the frame, resulting in a very soft image. So by soft, it means it's going to make it less, it's not going to be as crisp. And then after you play back the selection with effects, the performance indicators will disappear or cover a smaller area. So if I select best performance, we can see that this changes from the green/yellow to just the yellow, and then it's going to change the way this actually looks, and we can see, my goodness, did we lose a lot of, got any more of them pixels? Let me go back to that one effect. Yeah, it's really evident there in that one. So if you're looking for the best performance, if your playback's really stuttering, this is going to be the option for you. I'm going to leave it on draft quality so it doesn't look as horrible. We can see it's still a little pixelated, but it ain't bad. She working on it. All right. Notice the video quality menu contains 3 more options. So let me right-click this again. We have full quality, float quality, 10-bit, and we have full quality period. Oh, full quality float, float, 10-bit, and full quality. All right, to display the full quality, you use one of these. So you would just select one of these if you wanted to see the full quality, unless you're working with a 10-bit media or you need 32-bit float for a high-res film project, you'll use the full quality. What did I just say? Essentially, if you're not working on a film, then yeah, pick your right setting. The full quality option processes full frame video that matches the resolution you used during the import, consolidate, or transcode. So if I hit full quality, this video is going to be rendered out at full quality, whatever we saw earlier, 720, and it's going to look as crisp as it possibly can. But this can tax the playback. Let's see. Nope, still can't play. All right. So I can't play through, but again, you'll just have to believe me, it's in full quality. Let's move on now to rendering effects. So when you render effects, Media Composer creates a media file it plays back. So it's essentially, remember how we talked about when we import stuff, it goes to our MXF folder, and then it goes into those numbered folders. It's essentially making content. When you make a render, it's going to do the same thing. So that's all going to be saved on your MXF. So when you render effects, Media Composer creates a file and plays it back. If you decided to render while building effects, you'll want to minimize the time it takes to do this. Let's look at 2 time-saving render options. The render effect button, which is right, where is it? I always lose track of it. Here it is, right here. This is the render effect button. This is what it looks like. I'm going to zoom up on it for your convenience. Very nice, very pretty. And then we have the expert render option. That's another option. Both work well. So your effect will likely influence which option you choose. So whatever effect we're working with. So we have the render effect button. We'll start with that one. If you add a non-real-time effect to a segment with a blue dot, so let's look for a time warp effect, because we know time warp effects are not real-time effects. So we'll go to time warp. Wait a minute. I thought time warp, what am I missing here? Fluid morph, that's what I'm thinking. Not time warp, fluid morph. So I'm going to add a fluid morph effect to this. We can see, zoom up, little blue dot, and a little face. All right, so we got a little blue dot. So there's that. So now we have an effect that needs to be rendered if we were going to use this fluid morph effect. Look at it degrade. That's lovely. So, all right, so we've got our effect, our non-real-time effect added. And you can render it without leaving the effect mode. So if we click the effect mode here on our clip, we don't have the right track selected. We deselect that. Let me close this. Let me select it again. Now we can see our fluid morph appears. We can select what kind of morph we want to happen. I'll do stream to stream so we can get the most cursed image possible. To render an effect while working in the effect mode, we can click the segment with the blue dot or top layer in the composite if not already selected. So we already have our clip selected, check. Then we're going to click the render button in the timeline palette or the effect preview monitor. So I'm going to click it here. I could also click it in my effect preview monitor because, again, when we open our effects mode, this record monitor becomes our effect preview monitor. So I'm going to click it here in my timeline. Boom, boom, boom. And then in the render effect dialog box, we can click the drive that we want to send it to. If I was working off a flash drive or the Avid Nexus, I would select that here, but we're working off my computer, so we'll select Macintosh HD. And then we'll click the render effect button in the timeline. Oh, sorry, excuse me. And then we'll select the destination drive and click OK. So, all right, so we already said whatever. Now we can choose between application and background process. I'm going to explain this because Avid decided not to for some reason. Application means that it's going to interrupt our editing and it's going to start rendering this effect immediately. Background process means that it's going to be rendering this effect in the background and we can continue editing elsewhere, and then eventually when we come back to it, this blue dot will have turned green or disappeared, and we'll be able to use that effect. So I'm going to hit application right now and I'm going to continue reading. All right, so watch this effect render really quickly. Media Composer creates the render media. The blue or green dot disappears from the timeline segment, and the non-real-time effect or multi-layer composite should play back smoothly now. So we can see that little blue dot has disappeared. And when I come back through, remember it was stuttering earlier, it's not going to play when I hit L. It's sad. But if it was playing, wow, look, it did the fluid morph effect. Look how good that looks. Again, do as I say, not as I do. All right, quick note here from Avid, we have partial renders. You can interrupt lengthy render processes by hitting the Control plus period. So not plus button, but Control and period if you hit those at the same time. Or Command and period. Those will, again, interrupt that rendering process. So if you accidentally hit render on something maybe this chunky, let me turn on all these tracks here. And then if I hit T on my keyboard, mark the clip, and I'm like, oh, I want to render this section, and I hit OK, and then it decides to take forever, I could hit Command period on my keyboard. It says, oh, keep partial render, and I can keep or discard the render that was partially made by this. So we can see it rendered this one and this one, but it has not rendered this or this, but we have options. Options, people, options. Okay, Media Composer will ask you if you want to save the partially rendered files. Any particular render segments will display a red render bar at the top of the segment indicating the unrendered portion. So we can see this red bar? This is how much of this clip has not been rendered yet. So luckily I interrupted that. We can see that example right there on screen. So that's a quick note from Avid. If you exited the effect mode and need to render an effect, activate the effect track selector only and then click the render effect button in the timeline palette. So additionally, what I could do here is I could clear my marks. Let me hit G on my keyboard. And now I'm going to step out because I'm stepped in on expanded view here real quick. No. So I'll hold Option, I'll click Step Out, and now I'm just back to my regular timeline view. I don't have any nested views open. And I'm going to deselect these bottom tracks, blop, and I'm just going to have my V4 track selected. And then all I have to do is hit my render button, render effect. And now it's going to render, and this is where it's really cool. Why don't we need to select all our other tracks to render out this whole chunky boy here? Well, the answer to that is when we render the top layer, this top boy, our V4, again, top down, when we render our top layer, Media Composer takes a snapshot of each frame in the composite to create the render file that's then used during the playback. If you render each layer, Media Composer still uses only the top track render file during playback. Therefore, rendering everything else is unnecessary when all we have to do is render the topmost track, because again, it's looking top down. Depending on your sequence's final destination, you may need to render each layer before output, so keep that in mind. But if you need to improve playback for multiple effect builds or composites with staggered layers across multiple tracks, you'll need to render more than one effect. So instead of figuring out which effects to render, you can use the expert render effect. So if these were staggered, then I might want to, I would want to use my expert render. So let me just hit OK here, and we're going to render out this from the top down. And boom, now we can see this has all been rendered, and it's going to show us the view. Oh, let me turn on the proper thing here. It's going to show us the proper view of what this looks like. And when I hit play here, oh, it worked. Wow, that's so cool. Now we can see it rendered, and it's showing us from the top down. Now you're like, oh, why is this red bar still here? Well, because it doesn't need to render that as much as it just needs to, again, render that top-down image look. So it already knows what that looks like, and it can make that process happen. So even though this is only partially rendered, I don't have to worry about that. I just need to render this topmost layer. Okay, easy peasy. Let's move on now to expert render, and I'm actually going to make this necessary. I'm going to shuffle some of these clips around. I'm going to make this expert render necessary. Again, when we have... Oh, this looks so bad now. Okay. When we have our staggered effects, this is where expert render comes into play. So to expert render, the expert render feature determines which effects need to be rendered to achieve smooth playback. You can use this feature on specific vertical effect build or across a range of effects. To use the expert render on multi-layer effects, we're going to park the position indicator over the effect, activate all the tracks that contain the layer effect. So I already have my position indicator over my tracks. My track selected, bing bong bing. I'm going to select my V12 as well. And then we're going to right click the timeline and choose render. I'm going to right click in here. I'm going to come to render, and then we're going to go to expert render. But there's a specific one we want to pick. Render at position. Export. I'm losing my mind. Can you tell that I'm tired? Expert render at position. Click. And then we can select the media drive. Again, we want to go to Macintosh HD, and we can click OK. And it says, oh, I need to render all of this. Ta-da! So it gets that topmost render done and down and done, and we have nice smooth playback. And if I hit play on this, this is so funny how bad this looks, but I'm here for it. All right, since the example on my screen contains a composite made up of segments sharing the same duration, well, actually, I shuffled mine around. It says that I needed to use the same duration and location. Expert render prompts you to render one effect at the topmost. So it knew that I had these stacked. I actually already had this rendered. I don't know if that would affect it. It probably would because I did reorder them, but essentially it prompted us to render only the topmost because it knew what it was doing. It knew how these looked. All right, easy peasy. Okay, to render a range of effects in the timeline, we can mark an in at the beginning range and a mark at the end of the range. So I could go, oh, I want to render out my whole project. I could set an in and out. Oh, tell you what, I don't want to render this part. I just want to render to here. Hold command, snap to there. I'll set my out. Now I have an in and out region selected, and I can right click the timeline, choose render, and choose expert render in and out. So render, expert render in and out. And then it's going to say, oh, we have 5 effects out of 8 to render. It knows which ones we need to render, and I can click OK, and it's going to do that render now. Easy peasy. Once again, Media Composer creates rendered media, and it adds it to our MXF files in our Avid Media Files folder, right? The effect between the in and outs should play back smoothly now. So if I come to beginning and I hit play, it's so... Oh, it worked this time. This never gets old. Okay, all right. A few technical factors that influence real-time playback. Sit tight, Avid's got a chunk of information they want to share with you. And here's a screenshot of that sidebar note that Avid wanted to share with you. So go ahead, pause, take a second to read this, and keep this information in mind going forward. All right, let's keep moving. To nothing. Congratulations, you reached the end of this lesson. That's really everything we have time for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. To my students, I will see you in class happily. And to those of you online on the YouTubes, like, comment, subscribe. Catch you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.